In the cobbled heart of Bath, where the air often carried the scent of fresh lavender and warm scones, Charlotte swept open the shutters of her small bakery for the very first time. Char and Edward's hearth was carved into the wooden sign above the door, a name she had chosen with care and dreams stitched into every letter. The sun rose gently that morning, bathing the high street in a honey-colored glow. Locals wandered past, some waving, others peering curiously at the soft interior glow of the bakery. Edward stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, charming grin in place, as he dusted flour over the first batch of pastries. He was every bit the partner Charlotte had hoped for, ambitious, gentle, and endlessly supportive. Charlotte had poured her inheritance into the place, money from her late grandmother, who had once baked ginger biscuits on rainy Sundays and whispered, "This world is yours if you dare shape it." And so she did, with Edward by her side, promising late-night brainstorms, flour fights, and a life built on yeast and devotion. Their little bakery bloomed quickly. Locals adored the hand-piped eclairs, the elderflower tarts, and the fact that Charlotte always remembered their names. Edward, meanwhile, charmed the customers with his laughter and vision for expansion. He spoke of opening a second shop in Bristol, perhaps even launching a delivery service across the county. But even in a place that smelled of vanilla and hope, shadows lingered. It began with small things. Edward missed the morning proofing session more often, claiming he had meetings with suppliers. He seemed distracted during their evening accounts review, eyes flicking to his phone every few moments. Charlotte noticed but said nothing, believing stress to be the cause. After all, she reminded herself, ambition could wear many masks. One evening, while closing up, Charlotte spotted a glossy estate brochure tucked beneath the till. It showed commercial properties in Clifton, far more extravagant than anything they'd discussed. The address scribbled inside wasn't familiar. "Edward," she asked softly, "are we planning something I don't know about?" He looked up, surprised, then smiled too quickly. "Oh, just dreaming, love. You know me. Always thinking ahead." Charlotte tried to smile back, but the unease was a taste she could not swallow. Weeks passed. The bakery thrived, but Edward began spending less time inside it. Instead, a woman named Elaine, elegant, efficient, and new, began taking on more roles Charlotte had once handled with Edward. When Charlotte questioned it, Edward brushed it off. "Delegation, darling. We can't grow if we're buried in scones and spreadsheets." But late one night, Charlotte found a document while tidying Edward's office. A company registration form. Hearth and Company. Registered solely under Edward's name, with Elaine listed as co-director. Her hands trembled as she read, the words blurring beneath her eyes. The date on the form. 2 months ago. The oven timer rang in the distance, but Charlotte did not move. She stood frozen, heart thudding beneath her apron, as a terrible question began to rise. What exactly was Edward building, and would she still be a part of it? Rain tapped gently against the bakery window the following morning, soft and steady like the whisper of something inevitable. Charlotte stirred her coffee in silence, seated alone in the corner table usually reserved for regulars. The place should have felt warm, safe, yet everything felt different. Colder. As though the walls themselves were listening. She had barely slept. The document she found haunted her every thought. Why would Edward register a separate business behind her back? Why was Elaine involved? And why was none of it in her name, despite all the money and effort she had poured in? When Edward finally walked in, 2 hours late, his hair damp and collar open, Charlotte studied him differently. He laughed with a customer, kissed a baby on the forehead, and waved at an old man who passed with his newspaper. The perfect shopkeeper. The perfect act. But now, she knew it was an act. "I saw the registration form," she said quietly when he finally came to the back to grab his coat. He froze. Just slightly, but enough. What are you talking about?" "Hearth and Company. You and Elaine. It's dated." It's signed. And my name is nowhere on it. Edward looked away, jaw tight. It's not what it looks like. Charlotte crossed her arms. Then tell me what it is. He hesitated, then turned to her with a sigh. You've been under a lot of stress, Charlotte. You need to rest. Maybe step back for a bit. I've been making sure things run smoothly so you can breathe. You mean pushing me out, she replied. His expression flickered. There was something colder now, something calculated beneath the charm. That bakery would have died in the first 3 months if it weren't for me, he snapped. You bake, yes, but I built the business. The image. The relationships. I'm just doing what's best for it. Charlotte felt the blow of those words like a slap to the face. So it was true. He was preparing to take it all. Later that day, while Edward was out, meeting a potential investor, Charlotte called her cousin in London, an accountant. She needed to know the full truth. Within hours, documents began arriving, bank records, business filings, and the worst of them all, a loan agreement taken out against the bakery. Signed solely by Edward. Using her grandmother's money as initial capital. It was theft, dressed in paperwork. Even worse, he had listed the shop as Hearth and Company in the financial records. As if Char and Edward's hearth had never existed. That night, Charlotte stood in the bakery long after everyone had gone. The sign above the door still bore both their names, but she saw it now for what it was, a facade. The warmth of their dream had been hollowed out. She picked up a knife and removed the nameplate at the register, where their initials had once been engraved in copper. Carefully, she slipped it into her coat. By the time Edward returned, humming softly and reeking of someone else's perfume, Charlotte was gone. Only a note remained. I'm not your burden. I'm your storm. The sky above Bath turned a bruised grey the next morning, heavy with summer rain. But Charlotte wasn't in the bakery. She was on a train, heading south through the countryside, eyes locked on the rolling hills that passed like waves. In her coat pocket, the copper nameplate pressed against her leg like a memory refusing to fade. She arrived in Portsmouth just after noon, where her cousin Madeline met her with an umbrella and a frown of worry. A quiet woman with sharp instincts and a sharper tongue, Madeline had always been the one person Charlotte could turn to when the world grew cruel. I read everything, Madeline said after pouring them both tea in her little flat overlooking the sea. You've got enough here to bury him. Charlotte didn't smile. I don't want revenge, she said. I want my name back. My shop. My life. Madeline leaned forward, her voice firm. Then we fight smart. Over the next few days, Charlotte worked with Madeline to trace every account, every hidden filing, every sleight of hand Edward had pulled while she was elbow-deep in dough and dreams. They discovered that Edward had been siphoning profits for over 6 months. Worse still, he had applied for full ownership of the property lease, set to transfer in just 2 weeks. If Charlotte did nothing, she would lose everything. Meanwhile, back in Bath, Edward stood behind the bakery counter like a king at court. Elaine took over Charlotte's favorite duties, serving tea, greeting regulars, arranging jam pots by color. Customers asked, cautiously at first, where Charlotte had gone. Edward offered a rehearsed smile. She needed a break. Stress and all that. We're managing just fine. But not everyone believed him. Mrs. Kemble, the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for lemon curd tarts, whispered to her neighbor that she saw Charlotte crying in the alley behind the shop weeks before. A university student mentioned Charlotte's name wasn't on the till receipts anymore. Whispers began, soft but growing, like a draft beneath the door. By the weekend, Charlotte was back in Bath, though she didn't go straight to the shop. Instead, she met quietly with a solicitor. Armed with records, bank statements, and evidence of financial fraud, she submitted a formal legal challenge to Edward's claim of ownership. It wouldn't be instant, but it would freeze all transactions. The lease couldn't be transferred. Edward couldn't sell. And he certainly couldn't pretend the shop had always been his. 2 days later, Charlotte walked past the bakery window under a thick rain cloud. Inside, she saw Edward laughing, his arm casually resting on Elaine's chair. It should have hurt, but all Charlotte felt now was a strange, clean calm. Let him laugh. She had brought flour to their lives. Now came the fire. And fire, once lit, doesn't apologize. Monday morning dawned with a crisp breeze that scattered golden leaves across the high street. Charlotte stood across from the bakery she had once called home, watching as the early rush of customers queued beneath the awning. Char and Edward's hearth still shone on the sign, but soon, the truth beneath the paint would rise. Inside, Edward bustled about with exaggerated cheer, filling takeaway bags with croissants and bantering with a builder who ordered 2 bacon rolls and a black coffee. Elaine handled the till now, her smiles taut and rehearsed. There was something brittle behind her eyes, something Charlotte hadn't noticed before. The solicitor's letter had been served. Frozen lease. Financial review ordered. Fraud allegations under investigation. The storm had begun. And though Edward tried to carry on as though nothing had changed, he knew the winds were shifting. Customers noticed it too. There were murmurs in the queue, half-heard questions and sideways glances. Did you hear Charlotte's name's off the books now? I thought it was her shop. She was always here. I saw her the other day. She didn't look broken. She looked ready. At a nearby cafe, Charlotte sipped Earl Grey and listened to the voices drifting in from the bakery entrance. Her phone buzzed with a message from Madeline, press coverage in 2 days. They've got everything. Charlotte closed her eyes. It had only been weeks, but her life had turned inside out. And yet, she was still standing, still fighting, not from rage, but for reclamation. That afternoon, she returned to the bakery under a low grey sky, walking with quiet purpose. Elaine, standing at the window with a tray of mini quiches, saw her first. Their eyes met, and Elaine froze. Charlotte entered calmly. The room fell silent. A hush spread like smoke. Edward stepped forward from behind the counter, mask of confidence cracking ever so slightly. You've no right to be here. Charlotte looked at him, steady and unwavering. I built this shop. Every chair, every recipe, every customer who still remembers my name. You'll need more than a fake company and a pretty smile to erase that. Gasps rippled through the room. Elaine slowly lowered her tray. For a moment, she looked as if she might say something, but instead, she quietly stepped aside. Edward's nostrils flared. You left. You walked out. I stepped back to find the truth. And now I've brought it with me. She handed him an envelope, thick, stamped with the seal of the solicitor. His face paled as he opened it, eyes scanning the legal notice within. Your time's up, Rupert, she said. And you're not taking the bakery with you. He stared at her, stunned into silence. Charlotte turned to the customers, who stood wide-eyed, half-eaten muffins in hand. You'll hear the full story soon. But for now, thank you. For remembering. She walked out as silence gave way to murmurs, and murmurs to voices. People stepped outside after her. Not all, but enough. They followed the woman who'd once served them biscuits and hope, long before anyone knew her name would be worth defending. For the first time in weeks, Charlotte slept through the night. She awoke in Madeline's guest room to the pale pink of morning creeping through the curtains. Outside, Bath slowly stirred to life, its Georgian stone facades bathed in soft light. There were still court dates ahead, and Edward's legal team would not go down without a fight, but something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer afraid. That day, headlines began to appear. The Bath Herald, the Independent Chronicle, even a feature in Women in Business, they all told the same story. local baker fights back against betrayal and financial deceit. Photos of Charlotte smiling modestly beside a tray of almond buns began circulating online, accompanied by quotes like, "He underestimated me." Public sentiment was swift and furious. Customers who had once stood loyally in line outside the bakery now questioned their allegiance. Online reviews turned sharp. One former regular wrote, "We came for Charlotte's warmth, not corporate theft and false smiles." Edward tried to fight the tide. He issued statements, called it a personal misunderstanding, blamed Charlotte's emotions. But the community wasn't buying it. Elaine, meanwhile, quietly disappeared. Charlotte didn't chase her. She knew some people weren't villains, they were just weak, swept up in someone else's storm. Charlotte spent the afternoon walking the streets of Bath with Madeline, ducking into old bookshops and sipping coffee in hidden courtyards. For the first time, her steps weren't weighted with what ifs. And then came the call. Her solicitor's voice was calm, professional, and victorious. "The court has ruled in your favor. The original business registration is valid, and all subsequent financial maneuvering is deemed fraudulent. You retain ownership rights to both the brand and property lease. They've issued a formal order for full return of assets." Charlotte's legs nearly gave out. She sat, shaking, as the news settled around her like summer rain. The bakery was hers again. No more shadow names. No more whispered deception. Just her, the ovens, and the memory of why she began. 2 days later, under a sky the color of faded denim, Charlotte returned to the shop, not as an exile, but as its rightful owner. A small crowd had gathered outside, many holding paper bags with jam tarts she once made famous. As she unlocked the door, someone began to clap. Then another. And another. Applause rippled through the morning air like bells. Charlotte turned the sign from closed to open, pushed the door wide, and said simply, "Let's begin again." The bakery reopened quietly at first, without press, without banners, and without Edward. Charlotte wanted no spectacle, only truth, healing, and the scent of cinnamon swirls rising from the oven. But word traveled faster than steam off a fresh scone. By the end of the first week, the queue curled round the corner. Not for novelty. Not even out of sympathy. They came because she was back. The baker with honest hands and eyes that had known ruin, and survived it. Charlotte worked with quiet determination. She brought back her signature recipes, added 2 new ones, and reintroduced the tip jar she'd once used to fund a local children's book drive. Customers returned in waves, some shyly placing coins in the jar, others asking if she remembered their favorite treat. She always did. The counter now bore a small brass plate, no longer engraved with both their names. It simply read, "Charlotte's half." But not all was sweet. Edward's solicitor filed an appeal, desperate, last minute, and thin as paper. He argued undue emotional influence, tried to suggest Charlotte had manipulated public sympathy. But the judge saw through the performance, just as Bath had. Charlotte never attended the hearing. She was too busy teaching a new assistant, 16-year-old Ella, who had written her a letter asking if she could learn to bake under the lady who stood up for herself. Charlotte had hired her on the spot. On a rainy Thursday, Charlotte stepped into the storeroom to fetch a jar of ginger. As she turned back, she froze. Edward stood there, just beyond the doorway. He was thinner, tired-looking, dressed in a suit that no longer fit quite right. Raindrops clung to his coat like guilt. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cool but steady. "I just wanted to see it. One last time." She said nothing. "It was never meant to be like this," he added. "You were supposed to need me." Charlotte took a slow breath. "I did need you. But needing someone and being blind to betrayal aren't the same." Edward looked around the bakery, at the shelves he once helped install, the floor he'd swept, the warmth he'd tried to steal. It's better now, he said quietly. Charlotte nodded. Yes. It is. He turned to leave, but paused. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. She didn't reply. Instead, she returned to the counter where Ella was carefully placing warm buns into a basket. Everything all right? The girl asked. Charlotte smiled softly. Yes. Everything's just as it should be. Autumn crept into Bath with a rustle of russet leaves and the golden smell of spice in every corner of Charlotte's hearth. The shop had found its rhythm again, a heartbeat of clinking teaspoons, warm loaves, and the gentle chatter of those who knew they were welcome. Charlotte was different now. Not louder. Not colder. But stronger. Her resilience didn't shine like polished silver, it simmered quietly, like butter folded into pastry, shaping everything from within. Ella had flour on her nose again. Is this how you want the crust? She asked, holding up a tray of apple tarts. Not how I want it, Charlotte smiled, wiping her hands, but how you want it to taste. Trust your hands. They know more than your head. Ella grinned. Like you said on my first day, baking's part science, part soul. Charlotte nodded. Exactly. Word of Charlotte's return had continued to ripple beyond Bath. A culinary magazine in London requested an interview. A local primary school invited her to teach baking workshops. Even an old friend from university wrote, asking if she'd consider franchising. But she declined the flash. She didn't want empire. She wanted warmth. Some Sundays, she sat by the window with a pot of tea and watched people stroll past, young couples, tired mothers, students in oversized jumpers. No one looked twice at the woman in the window. And that, she decided, was freedom. One evening, just as twilight slipped across the rooftops, a familiar voice reached her ears. Hello, stranger. It was Martha, a former customer, once a quiet presence who used to sketch in the back corner while sipping spiced chai. She smiled now with wide, admiring eyes. I never said this before, Martha began, but I used to come here when I didn't believe in myself. You were always here, making things gentle. I thought I'd lost that for good when you disappeared. Charlotte swallowed, her voice soft. Sometimes, we disappear to find the bits of ourselves we forgot to protect. Martha nodded. Well, you found yours. And now we all have a place to breathe again. After she left, Charlotte stood alone in the soft lamplit silence of her shop. The walls no longer echoed with doubt. The oven no longer baked for someone else's praise. This was hers now. Every brick, every bun, every brave new beginning. She reached into her apron, pulled out the old copper nameplate she'd once taken in silence, and placed it in the drawer beneath the till, not to hide it, but to honor the path she had taken. Charlotte didn't need her name etched on a sign to prove she belonged. She had already baked it into the walls. Winter arrived with quiet grace. Snow dusted the rooftops of Bath like icing sugar on a Victoria sponge, and inside Charlotte's hearth, the air carried the sweet perfume of clove, orange, and nutmeg. The bell above the bakery door chimed steadily now, not with frenzy, but with rhythm, like the heartbeat of a place reborn. Locals came for mince pies and mulled apple cake. Tourists, having heard whispers of the woman who reclaimed her name, queued in coats and scarves just to taste a story they'd only read in headlines. But for Charlotte, the shop wasn't a symbol. It was a sanctuary. She no longer looked for Edward's shadow in every corner, nor did she wonder whether people pitied or praised her. That part of her life, of survival, was done. Now came the living. The kitchen had grown into a place of shared laughter and quiet confidence. Ella had learned to braid challah like a pro. A second assistant, Mo, had joined the team, an ex-chef who'd burnt out in London and rediscovered joy in kneading dough with bare hands. Even customers had started to leave recipes, old family notes tucked into envelopes, as if the walls of Charlotte's hearth had begun collecting the town's memories. One snowy evening, just before closing, a mother and her young son stepped into the warmth. The boy stood in awe before the glass counter, face pressed close. "He wants the gingerbread star," the mother said with a smile. Charlotte carefully placed the star in a small brown paper bag, tied with string, and knelt to the boy's height. "You know," she whispered, "we only bake those when snow touches the pavement. It's a magic rule." The boy's eyes widened. "So it's real?" Charlotte nodded, her voice low and sure. "Very real." The bell chimed as they left, and the door shut behind them with a gentle thud. Charlotte turned back to the oven, now glowing with its final batch of plum scones. Outside, Bath shimmered in stillness. She took off her apron slowly, folding it with care, and hung it by the door. The room was quiet now, save for the ticking clock and the rise and fall of the old radiator. Charlotte looked around, not for what was missing, but for what had stayed. The flower beneath her nails. The copper pot hanging by the window. The light. She walked to the front, locked the door, and turned the sign one last time that evening.